All right, pop, another server drop. Ready to throw another one in the series that we got going on here. And the reasoning for the pop series is that I want to give you guys a basic idea or some basic tools to be able to pop boxes and to understand why and how we're doing what we're doing. I've seen a lot of different walkthroughs for these capture the flag type of things, and they go through and they tell what commands they run, and they basically just do a walkthrough from top to bottom. But I've seen a lot of them don't go into great detail about why did they run this command, or why are they using this particular tool maybe over another one or something like that, or the theory behind what we're doing to pop the box. So in this series, I'm basically thinking that you're coming from a beginner's perspective, and the only real prerequisite would be that I expect you to have some basic Linux navigational skills. Other than that, each video in the series, I will explain what I'm doing. So if I explain in one video about Nmap and some of the switches, I'll do it in the other videos as well, because I want them to be kind of self-contained, where it's not like you have to follow the previous one to understand the second one. So these are all going to be self-contained, and I'll explain them in a lot more detail than I've seen in some other cases with the walkthroughs. And for me, I like this TryHackMe. It's pretty awesome. They got a free account that you can get, and you can get a lot of free rooms where you can practice in, but they also have a paid one, which is really reasonable. It's like $10 a month at the time of this video, and you get your own Kali box that you can run in a browser, which is pretty sweet. I'll be running it from my own virtual machine from VirtualBox, and if you want to know how to set that up, something like that up, I have another video on my Essentials page on my website that will go over that particular one. It's also on my YouTube channel. That's what I pull it from. So I like to use these capture the flags to teach these hacking techniques, because I'm a very big proponent of learn by doing, and a lot of people out there that I've met when I was teaching for cybersecurity stuff, they also learn better that way. So in this case, I like to use these rooms like this to demonstrate certain techniques and certain topics that can be delved into a little bit more and to understand exactly how to do it, instead of just giving you this big fat book of everything, and you have to read through everything, which is great to have, right, as a beginner. But this is the way I choose to do this one here. And the basic pen testing one is a good one to show you just the basics of popping a box and some of the different techniques you would use to do that. So when you're using TryHackMe, you have this deploy machine right here on the room that you join, and then it will deploy it, and this is the actual IP address. Now, if you're using TryHackMe, the actual IP address of the machine, because you use an OpenVPN in this case, because I'm not using their built-in attack box on the website, is going to be the tunnel address. So whenever you see ton0, and anytime we do like a reverse shell or anything like that, that will be the IP address you use, not the ETH0 that you typically see there. Okay. All right, so the first things when we actually deploy the machine, we're going to kind of go over some of these questions that they have here just to kind of give a little flow to the lesson. But this one here is basically just saying, it's asking different questions about, hey, what ports are open, what services are open, that sort of thing. So it kind of guides you a little bit. And a lot of times they give a hint, but they're not extremely verbose, which is good. And it kind of forces the user to really research the answer for that particular one. All right, so let's get right down to it here. So we have a box, and its IP address is here. And they ask in a series of questions. The first question is, find the services exposed by the machine. Now, to do that, what will typically happen in most cases when you're doing a capture the flag will be doing what's called a port scan. So I'm going to type in the command for it, and then I'm going to explain it, because it takes a little time to run. So while it's running, I'll kind of go a little bit more into detail. So we're going to use a very well-known one called Nmap. And so I'm going to do Nmap. And when I say tac, I mean dash. It's just something I've always said. So tac N, tac capital P, small case n, and Linux is case sensitive, so be aware of that. Tac capital A, and then I'm just going to go ahead and grab the IP address in question, which is that one. Pop that bad boy there and hit enter. So what I'm doing here is the Nmap will scan open ports. Now, if you're not very familiar with ports and how they work, there's 65,535 ports that are entryways into a machine, into a system or a computer. Typically what they'll do is they'll have the first 1023, because 0 is considered a number in this case, but essentially they'll say 1024. So the first 1024 ports are going to be ones that are called well-known ports. So they're going to be things like port 80 for web servers, or port 22 for SSH, or 21 for FTP, things like that. And then after the 1024, all the way up until 40,000 something is going to be what they call registered ports. So if you actually look on, let me grab this here. So if you actually just look up TCP ports, you're going to see a wiki here that has all the different port numbers and such, and UDP as well. And you'll see here listed 1 through 1024 are going to be what they call well-known. And then as you go down towards this area, so 1024 kind of on high, are going to be reserved. So these are going to be for like certain applications, for instance. So the Microsoft DCOM services has registered port 1029 for their use, or IANA, or the Kerberos Post Office Protocol has registered 1109, things like that, right? Those are registered ports that you typically wouldn't use. Now, as you go down a lot further, you're going to see towards the end here that they're going to call other things like ephemeral ports or non-ephemeral. So after this 49,151, everything from there to the end, which is 65,535, are what are going to be dynamically created ports. So for instance, the web servers, unencrypted web server, typically is going to be what they call port 80. Now you can set it to whatever port you want, but if you don't want somebody typing in the URL with a colon and a port number, you just want them typing in your web address, you're going to use port 80 or 443 if you use an HTTPS. So if I have a web server that's port 80, and I'm communicating with that web server from my computer will go out a port, okay? It will be going to a port 80, but the actual port showing up from my computer will be one of these from this range, 49,152 to 65,535. Okay, that's dynamically created so that when port 80 receives the request and responds, it's going to send it back to that particular port. Okay, so those are what they call the ports, the ephemeral ports. So essentially, when you do this type of scan that I did right here, and you don't specify a port, in this case I didn't, it'll scan the top 1,000 ports, okay? And the key thing to remember is that the default for Nmap, unless you specify, is going to be TCP. Okay, there's two different protocols that we use. We have TCP, which is a full connect, where they call it SYN-ACK, and ACK, where I'm doing a three-way handshake with a web server, and that gives it reliability because you know the packets will be complete and they will be completely sent, as opposed to UDP, which is typically used for things like VoIP or streaming, and they don't really care about that three-way reliability. They just fast speed, right? So there are, like I said, 65,535 TCP ports, but there are also 65,535 UDP ports. Some of the more common ones you would see for UDP would be something like for SNMP, would be like 161, 162, things like that. So when you do a default Nmap scan, like I've done here, all it's looking for is the TCP ports. It is not looking for the UDP ones. It's important to remember. And without specifying a port, it's just going to scan the top 1,000 that they consider top, like FTP, SSH, that sort of thing. So the TAC-N that I have on this particular one means don't do DNS resolution. In other words, let's speed up our scan by not having to do that extra step of DNS resolution. The TAC capital PN is one I use all the time because there are certain servers that don't allow or disallow ICMP or ping, right? And this will go ahead and skip doing the ping host discovery, if you will, with that. So that will kind of also get past times when you get an error saying no ports are shown as open because they disallow the ICMP protocol. The TAC capital A is called an aggressive scan. So if you're doing this for a job and you're trying to keep yourself out of the eyeballs of the blue team or the defense team, you don't want to run this one because it's extremely noisy. And that's why they call it aggressive. So it actually combines a lot of different scans in one. one of the scans that it puts into here is what they call an operating system scan. So that would be TAC capital O for Nmap. It'd be called the operating scan, and it has certain probes that are actually being used to determine the actual OS version. Now, I have another video specifically on Nmap, so I'll reference you to that to kind of get a full deal of that. But anyways, that's what that one is. It also has a version scan, which is TAC S capital V. And again, capitalization is important in Linux. That one will pull the version of a port. So if I didn't include that, it would just say open SSH, right? It would just say open here and SSH there. By doing the S capital V, it tries to pull the exact version of it, okay? It also will do a default script scan, and that's S capital C. And what that is Nmap has its own scripts using the language Lua, and they have an NSE extension, and it allows you to further what Nmap can do. So I want to do a default script scan, which will look for things like the HTTP title, HTTP server headers, those sort of things. So very generic, non-intrusive type of scripts. Okay, so, and the last thing it will do will be a trace route. So by doing the TAC capital A, you get all 4 of those in one fell swoop. So every video I'll be doing will start with this. This is the one I always run. And if I want to know all the ports, I would do a TAC P TAC. So dash P dash. That will scan every single port. That will take a while. All right, so now that we run that, we can see some information. So one, we see this one here, 22, open SSH. So we know, okay, they have an SSH server. So already in my brain, what I'm thinking of, okay, to get the methodology down or the mindset of what we're doing here is in these capture the flags, they have flags on the machines themselves. Typically, you'll have like a user flag. And then for privilege escalation type of game, they'll want you to get the root flag, okay? And root on Linux would be the top dog. So in this case here, my goal or mindset is I know there's an SSH server open. Hopefully I can find a user of some sort and try to brute force credentials of that, and then SSH into this machine, and then try to elevate my privileges from there, or, do a pseudo trick or something like that to try to get the root flag. So that's very important to remember. 22 is open. Port 80 is open, which means we have a web server of some sort. In this case here, we can see it says site does not have a title. It's probably just the normal Apache website, but you would typically browse to that would be your first choice, right? That would be something you would do. But something interesting we also see here is they're using SMB. SMB is kind of like a easy layman term would be like a file sharing type of protocol between machines, from client to server type of machines. And Windows uses what they call SMB. And you can also have interoperability with Linux on that by implementing something called Samba. But in this case here, we know that 139 and 445, usually 445, is the one that's typically done for SMB. Now it's important because the big, the WannaCry ransomware had actually attacked or exploited an older version of SMB called version 1, and those ports are important to know. As a matter of fact, I have another video that I'm going to be doing for this series called Blue, where we're going to exploit that one in particular. But anyways, so we see there is some SMB here. So we could probably use a tool called Enum for Linux to kind of get some information on that. So that's pretty cool. And then we have 8009. And that one we don't really know. We know it's an Apache server. It's a JServe, so we know that's probably some sort of server on that. And then lastly, we also have an 8080 web server using an Apache Tomcat. And these are also important to know because there may be vulnerable versions of that. So those are really the only things we need to know. As we scroll down, it did a script scan. So it looked and tried to see if there was any SMB OS discovery, if there was any SMB on there, version 2, those sort of things. So we're pretty good to go on that. All right, so the next thing you would do is you would go back here. Let's go back here and look at the TryHackMe. So in this case here where it said, find the services exposed by the machine. In this case, they don't need an answer, but we already know which ones they are from an Nmap scan. Now it says, what's the name of the hidden directory on the web server? So in this particular case, the web server being this IP address. So if we were to copy this to a clipboard, and we'll just directly browse to it because we know port 80 is open. And it says undergoing maintenance. All right, so we know nothing really here, right? But a lot of times the URLs will have a slash, and then they'll have some other folder paths that are listed in there. And sometimes what you can try to do is a robots.txt file, if they have one, and it doesn't. But if you were to do robots.txt, the idea is that you have a bunch of web crawlers out there like the Google bot and Apple bot and Bing bot, and they crawl different directory paths for a website. And if the web server administrator doesn't want certain paths crawled, they'll make a file called robots.txt. It's a text file, and they'll put it in the root of the web server, and they'll list what they want to disallow. And it will tell the bots, hey, don't crawl this, don't make this indexable, essentially, in this case here. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is to see if there's any in here, because there's no robots.txt disallowing anything. So the best way to kind of go about this is you can do what they call directory busting. So again, I'll run the command and then I'll kind of explain it as we go. For this particular one, I'm going to use a tool called Gobuster because I find it a lot faster than Dirbuster, which is another competitor for that. So I'm going to say Gobuster dir tac u, and then we'll put http:// and we'll put in the actual IP address that we're looking for. And then sometimes I'll just put a slash at the end of it. It's not a real big deal on that. And then what we'll do is we'll do attack w/usr/share. By the way, when you're typing these in, if they're actually known paths, you can hit tab after you type a couple words. So if I said WOR and hit enter or tab, it'll finish. It will autocomplete for me. So in this case, we're looking for a word list. And for this one, I think what we'll do is we'll use the common.txt one under dirbuster. So I'll just say dirb, and we'll do the common.txt. Okay. And I think we got everything there. Hit enter. All right, so what it's doing is it's now looking for common paths. It's essentially taking words from this list and it's appending it in this little spot right there, okay? So the dir for Gobuster means that we're doing a directory search, because you can do some other different searches with Gobuster. This one's saying we're doing a dir for a directory path. TACU means the URL, in this case being the IP address of the server. TACW means word list, and in this case, in Kali Linux, which is what I'm using here, it has a list of a variety of different word lists under this directory here. And the one I'm choosing, just to kind of speed things up, is the under dirb, which is for Dirbuster, and we're looking at common.txt. Okay, and there's many other ones you can use, but. All right, so looks like we've got a few different things popping up here, and looks like it's all done. So we have that one, which is pretty common. That one's pretty common. This one is not common. So let's take a peek at that one. So we're going to copy that over here. We're going to go back up here, and we're going to do a /development, and we're going to look see if anything's there. All right, look, very cool. So we have two different text files here that we can kind of screw with. So let's take a look at the first one. All right, so let's see. Let me scroll this up. It says, I've been messing with that struts stuff. Okay, so that right there is already a key trigger word for me, because there's an actual Apache version thing called struts. So we know, okay, they're probably using struts here. And it's pretty cool. I think it might be neat to host on this server. Haven't had any real web apps, blah, blah, blah. It's the REST version of the example. And right now I'm on version 2.5.1.2. All right, definitely want that, because other versions were giving me trouble. Now, it has a TAC K at the end, which kind of leads me to believe there's a username that starts with a K. And then down here, we see a TAC J, so probably have a username that starts with J somewhere here. SMB's been configured, got Apache set up. Awesome. So the idea of this here and this here tells me they're probably using Apache struts, and we can come back and we can look at our deal here and see. All right, so they're not actually listing struts here. They got Tomcat and they got some other ones, but it's probably going to be one of those. So what we can do is we can look for an exploit in that particular one. So I'll type in Apache struts, and we'll do that particular one there. And we'll look for exploits just for that particular one. Now, there's a website called ExploitDB. Now, there are many different types of websites out there that are for exploits. Let me go to this one real quick here. The reason I prefer exploit database is because there are no honor amongst thieves. And what I mean by that is sometimes a guy with bad intentions will actually make an exploit script and upload it to one of these exploit websites. But the actual exploit script is the exploit. It's actually the one that actually breaks into you as the attacker. It breaks in and sets up a backdoor in your machine or some other kind of nefarious thing. So if you don't read through the actual code and understand what's going on in the code, you just kind of run it script kiddie style, then you would be exposed. Now, what's cool about Exploit DB is they're well known for vetting any of the exploits that are on their site. So they actually have teams that will look through this stuff, verify that it's not an actual backdoor script that's being put here for the exploits. So exploit database, pretty awesome one. And we can see here it's got some sort of REST plugin extreme, but it's the version that we're looking for right there. So we know that this one here is likely vulnerable, but then again, you never know because it doesn't say bracket to the left equals. So it's anything below this version. So it's kind of misleading, but I'm just showing you this because we're not actually going to use this because I don't believe it's vulnerable to this because, again, it doesn't have a bracket equals, which would indicate it's also included in that version. But if you look down through it, you can download it here where it says exploit, and you can run it. In this case here, it looks to be Python script right there. And as you look down through it, if you know what you're looking at when you're looking at Python scripts, you'll be able to read through it and see exactly what it's trying to do in this particular case. So this one is for remote code execution, so it's probably some sort of buffer overflow that it tries to run first, and that will give code access based on where it dumps or takes over the memory slider there, the EIP pointer, things like that. But we won't get into that because, again, we're not using that today. But I just wanted to show you that this is a part of the methodology that you would do, one of the parts of the workflow that you would do when trying to break into this, okay? All right, so now that we know that, let's go back here and let's take a look at the other file, j.txt. It says, I've been auditing the contents of Etsy Shadow. Now, Etsy Shadow is a location on a Linux machine that will have typically the password hashes for the credentials of who's logged in. So, for example, if I go to my Kali Linux, and I say cat/Etsy/shadow, I'm sorry, let me do passwd. This will list all the different users that are on this particular machine, right? So I have Ray down here, I got Leroy here, and I also have root all the way up the top here, right? So in this particular case, when you see an X here in this field, it typically means that the password hash for these users are stored in another file called Etsy Shadow. And Etsy Shadow can't be viewed unless you're root. So if I do cat/Etsy/Etsy/shadow, that will actually show the password hashes. I'm not going to do it here on my machine because I don't want you to know what those are or for later use or whatever. But that's essentially what you would run for that. So it says here, make sure you don't have any weak credentials. I was able to crack your hash really easily. So obviously they're using a pretty weak password that we'll probably try to crack in a little bit. All right, very cool. So we got that information. We're good there. Development's got a few different things, so that helps us out. All right, so the next thing we want to probably try, let me go ahead and clear this real quick. Probably the next thing we want to try is we know the usernames are J and K, right? They start with a J and a K. So we need to get onto this machine somehow, and we want to see if there's any username specific other than just the letter that we can actually use. To do that, we can use a tool called enum for Linux. And this one we're going to do attack A, which would be use all the simple basic enumeration tests that it runs, and then we would give the IP address of that machine. So in this case, let's copy it over, and we'll go into it there. So what it's going to do, this is actually trying to enumerate via SMB all of the different things that are on this particular machine. And what we're looking for, hopefully, is some sort of usernames, specifically start with a J and a K because we know they're two of the people that are actually involved in this case here. But there's also some other information that gets put on this particular one here. So while it's running, let me scroll up a little bit. So you can see here it's actually trying to enumerate some basic things about the system. and because it is using SMB, it understands, you know, how to attack that and whatever. Anytime you see Samba, as I mentioned before, it's the ability for Linux to interoperate with SMB, which is a Windows typical protocol, sometimes called CIFS as well, if you see it as that. Here they're actually trying to map shares on this particular one here, and whether or not we can map to anonymous, which is interesting to be able to see if anything's there. It's telling us we can map to it and list, which may have some interesting files in there as well. They're trying some different null share stuff. You can notice the port numbers. So 139 and 445 are the ones you're going to key in on when you do your port scan. It tries to enumerate what the password policy is here. It doesn't look like there's really much password policy going on, especially for the domain. So yeah, not really worried about that. It's trying to get some local groups, group memberships, all kinds of good stuff there. So it's actually enumerating users right now, and this will actually take quite a bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and then we'll come back as soon as we have found some good stuff, and then we'll continue on. All right, so it looks like we have found user K and Jan. So those would be our K and our J that we were looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and control this, C this. That's all the information we really needed there. So we know SSH is open. We know there's 2 users on the machine called K and Jan. Likely they have credentials that can log in via SSH. So to do that, we obviously are going to need a password for one of these or both of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Hydra, and we're just going to go ahead and let's just pick Jan, for instance, and we're going to try to crack or try to brute force our way into the SSH server through Jan. So to do that, we're going to use a tool called Hydra, and I'll explain this as after we run the command. So I'm going to say Hydra tac F. I'll say tac T6. Tac little case L, again, case sensitivity, Jan, tac capital P. In this case, we're going to use another word list called Rocky, which is really famous. And so that one will be tac capital P for password. And that's under USR, share, and word lists, and rocky.txt. Now keep in mind, if you haven't deflated this file, it will show up as a GZ file or .gz. You'll have to do a G unzip on it, and I'll leave that to you to look that up to see how to do that. All right, so we're using the rocky.txt SSH // I can't remember what my last copy was, so copy that. Oops. And we'll put it here and hit enter. All right, so what it's doing here on the tac F is it's saying when a credential is found or a password is found, stop Hydra. The tac T would mean threads, so I want to kind of speed things up a little bit, hopefully by adding more threads to do the execution part. In this case, I'll say 6, just randomly picking one. The tac little case L means that we know who the username is specifically. If we didn't know the username, we would do a tac capital L, and that would be pointing to a word list of some sort. So if I had a username list text file, I would do a tac capital L and then use that particular one for that. In this case, we do know the name, Jan, but we don't know the password. So the tac capital P means I'm pointing to a password list file. And if it was known, if the password was known, then we would use a lowercase p and then put the password in. In this case, we're using one called rocky.txt. This one comes by default in Kali Linux. It's a pretty large one. It's what a lot of CTFs will use to do password cracking. So it's pretty full featured. The first time that you use it at all, it'll be in .gz format, which means you'll have to do a G unzip and unzip this particular text file, and then you can use it from there. You can't use it while it's in this gzip format. The SSH means that I'm actually trying to brute force a particular protocol. With Hydra, you can SSH multiple protocols, and what it will do is it will just pound away at the SSH and try to log in to the IP address given via the SSH protocol using these word lists. And the free version is a little slower. The paid version that you can get will be a lot faster. In this case, we're attacking SSH specifically, and we're throwing a big word list at it and we're saying use the name Jan for username, but use all of these passwords from rockyou.txt and tell me if you find anything. If you were able to successfully connect to SSH, we know that this credential is correct. So it's just a simple brute force that'll happen. So this may take a little bit of time as well. So I'll go ahead and pause the video during this part. All right, looks like we have finally got that. It took a while, so what I did is I restarted it using 16 threads instead to speed things up. But anyways, we can see here based off of this that the login for Jan has a password of Armando. So what we're going to do is we're going to SSH then into the server using this particular passphrase. So we'll say SSH and then we'll say Jan and @ So SSH is a way to run commands or run different things using command line on another machine. Now the older way of doing it was what they call Telnet, and the problem with Telnet was everything was in clear text. So if I were to type in Jan and Armando, that would be pushed through in clear text. So if anybody was kind of monitoring the network with Wireshark, they would see all that in clear text, and that's no good. So they made this SSH, which uses certificates or what they call public key cryptography to be able to do this sort of thing. So to SSH into a machine, the syntax is SSH, the name of the person or the user, @ and then the IP address. So in this case here, there's our IP address. We hit enter. First time through, it'll ask you, do you want to go ahead and connect and keep this, remember this fingerprint certificate for this? And we'll say yes, hit enter. And then it's going to ask for the password. So in this case here, we know it's Armando. So we'll type that in. And it should go ahead and drop us in as Jan. So down here, you can see a prompt, and there is Jan. So what I do typically whenever I teach this sort of thing, the first thing I say is to type certain commands when you first break in. Now, when I was teaching certified ethical hacking classes back in the day, I had always started the class week by some basics of Linux, and some of the students would get frustrated and be like, hey man, what's this, player? Why are you doing all this Linux stuff, man? Let's get popping. And I said, well, okay, so let's pretend that you popped and got into a Linux machine. They're like, yeah. And I said, all right, what now? And they were clueless, because the reality is that because Linux is so resilient and stable, much more so than Windows in most cases, a lot of servers and web servers run on Linux, not Windows. I mean, there are some that run on Windows using IIS, but typically you'll see a Linux OS with an Apache install for a web server, or just a general server you'll see on Linux. And any self-respecting Linux admin will probably tell you that they don't use a GUI for any management of these Linux machines. They will use shell, command line, or in this case, shell. But for the Windows people, it's the command prompt essentially concept. So in this idea here, if we were to break in, if we knew that that was the high targets out there was Linux, and we knew we were going to break into it via SSH, it would behoove us to learn different Linux commands so we can navigate it and do things in the actual victim machine once we've compromised it. So that's why it's important to take my Linux course that I have in my Essentials series portion and learn some of the basics ways to navigate around and do things in Linux. So one of the things I say when I first break into a machine, and I know it's Linux, the first thing I will run is a command called ID. And that will tell me right off the bat, okay, who am I broken in as far as what permissions do they have? Now, the root permission level, the root user, will be indicated usually by a 0, and that will be meaning, okay, they have full root privileges, kind of like your God mode, if you will. And anything that's 1,000 and higher are typically going to be your users, right? Your generic users that don't have any root privileges. So in this case, we can see the UID, the user ID, 1001, and we can see the group ID of 1001 as well. Now, if it were listing things like some sudo stuff, then we would kind of tap into that. For instance, if I wanted to see if they had any sudo privileges, which means in Windows vernacular, it'd be like run as administrator, I would type in sudo tac L. In this case, I would put in the password for Jan, which we now know is Armando. And this tells me that this Jan does not have any sudo privileges, so I can't run anything as root at all. So the next thing I would do is pwd to find out, well, where am I? Okay, so here we can see PWD means print working directory. Here we can see I'm in the home folder for Jan. Now the next thing I would do is an ls tac LA. The reason I'm doing a tac LA is to list the directories, list the files that are in the directory. But if you just did an ls, it wouldn't show any hidden files. And some hidden files that have a dot at the beginning of them are sometimes important, like .ssh, for instance. So I'm going to say ls tac LA. Okay, so we see something here called less HST. I don't even know what that is, but I'll just say cat. Let's just try it, see if we can get access to it. HST and see what the heck it is. Okay, so permission denied, can't do it. So we already know that from something I mentioned earlier, that there's a way to determine how many users or what users are on a machine, and that would be etc passwd. Now, to display something in a command prompt or shell, to display text from a file, you could use a command called cat. So I say cat, and then I want to read, because everything in Linux is a file. But in this particular case, I want to list what's in etc passwd. So I would say /etc, which is a location, passwd, and hit enter. So here it will tell me any users that are on this machine. So we already see up here that there's root, usually at the top. We see an X, meaning there's a shadow file that has the actual hash. And then down here a little further will typically be where some other users are. So we see here down there, we see K. Okay, so we know there's a K user on here. So what we can then do is we can kind of ls the home directory to see how many folders there are. And so we'll say ls/home. Okay, so there is a K folder. So let's change the directory to /home/K, and let's see what's in there. Now I'm logged in as Jan, so I probably can't do anything here, but let's just check anyways. All right, so ls tac LA, look at that. Here we go. So pass.back, that looks like it may be our flag that we need for this challenge. So what the heck, let's just try it, see if we can cat it. Okay, .bak, and permission denied. And the reason why it's denied is because these right here. It tells me that the user ID that this was running under is K, and the group ID is K. And over here is a permission set. And the way the permissions work in Linux is the first 3 will belong to the owner of the file. The next 3 would be the group of that particular user, and the last 3 would be everybody else. Okay, so in this case, for this file, there's a R and a W and a dash. Now this dash could also be an X, like this. So that's the full amount of permissions you can put on a Linux machine. You can say read, write, or execute. In this case, we can see that the owner of the file can read and write. The group can read only, and everybody else can read only. So going down to our pass, we can see here, by the way, this dash means it's a file. This D means it's a directory. So we come down to our pass.back, and we can see that the owner of the file is the only person that can do anything with this, and I am not the owner, K. Okay, so our goal next in our mindset for methodology, we're already thinking, is somehow we need to get K's password and be able to SSH into that. So to do that, we're going to do a little enumeration on the machine as Jan. Okay, so there is a particular file that, or a script that a lot of people like to use for what they call privilege escalation script. So there's one called Linpeas.sh, and this GitHub here will show, oops, that's the wrong one. Should be this one here. There we go. So we can see this is a shell script by the .sh, and it's a script that will actually run a super large amount of different commands that you could do manually, but this will automate doing all of those. So it will do your things like cat etc passwd. It will do a find for what they call suid bit files, all kinds of different enumeration type of commands, all in one script. The problem is, though, it's here, and it's not on Jan's machine. It's not on this server. So there's a few different ways you can go about getting that over there. One, first we would download it, and I've already downloaded it here to this location. So if I type ls on my attack machine, I already have Linpeas here. Now, one way I could do it is I could say Python 3 tac m http.server, and then I don't know, 8,000 or whatever. And what that will do is we'll start a web server right here in this directory. So everything in this directory would be servable if somebody were to navigate or browse to my IP address :8,000. But I'm going to be doing that in other videos. So I'm going to do a different way around it this time. We're going to use something they call secure copy. So secure copy is kind of like, well, your FTP kind of concept of copying files from one location to another, but we're doing it over a secure encrypted channel. So in this case, we already know Jan here. We already know her username. We already know the machine's IP address. So we can actually do a secure copy protocol because this is a Linux to a Linux, and it should already be built in. Shouldn't have any issue with this. So what we do is we do SCP, and we do the path to the file that I actually want to copy from over to that machine. So we know it's in root, which is where I have it. So I'll say Linpeas.sh. That's the one I want to copy over to the machine. So let me make sure I'm spelling that right. Linpeas, yep. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll type in Jan, because we already know Jan has an SSH at, and then we'll give the IP address, which I can't remember what I copied last. So let me grab it from here. There we go. All right, so I'm saying, okay, SCP, this file over to this particular machine, whatever IP address, and then I have to give it an actual location that I want to SCP it to. So in this case, I'll do a colon at the end of it, okay? And then I'll say /dev/SHM. Now, I could essentially have also done the download using wget if I were hosting the file, and I would just find a folder that Jan has writable access to. Typically temp would be one, TMP, but this one here is a pretty interesting one here. It actually is a implementation of what they call traditional shared memory, and the idea in layman's terms essentially is I'm using RAM to temporarily store this file or whatever I'm sending over. So it's usually a way that attackers will do it so they don't actually try to download it specifically to the temp folder, which is the one that a lot of people like to monitor. This one here is a little bit out of mind for some people or some blue teams to be able to do it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to copy this bad boy on over. And what did I do here? I didn't actually do the SCP command, did I? Am I the wrong one? Let me see. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was on the wrong window. There we go. So Jan at the IP location :dev/SHM. So I'm doing it from my machine over to there. Hit enter. Password we already know is Armando. Hit enter. And we can see, boom, it copied. Okay. So now coming back into this window, which I confused myself with apparently. What I want to do now is I want to CD over to /dev/SHM, and we'll do, oops, I did it twice. There we go. And then we'll do an ls tac la here, and there's our Linpeas. Now, in order for us to run an sh or bash shell script, you have to actually change the permissions to it to be able to run. In this particular case, you typically wouldn't change permissions and give permissions for read, write, execute for everybody. But in this case, just to be quick about it, I'm going to do that. So we're going to say chmod, in this case here being our command to be able to change permissions in something. I'm going to say 777. Now, what that means is the read of permissions. I'm going to see if I get this right now. The read one is a 4. The write is a 2. And execute must be another 2. I can't remember the name. I honestly don't remember the name of it. But if I did a 7 for the owner of the group, or I'm sorry, owner of the object, and a 7 for the group and a 7 for everybody else, it basically gives read, write, execute. Okay, that's what the 7 is. I'm just brain farting a little bit on the actual numbers of it, but you can look it up. So we're going to do a chmod, and then you have to put the name of the file that you want to change permissions on to be able to run it. And I don't know why I keep doing the S there. So linpeas.sh. All right, so now that is executable. So what we do is a ./ and the name of the file, in this case being linpeas.sh. And the reason we do that is because we're running the actual bash shell script. So I'm going to hit enter. So what it's going to do is it's going to start going ahead and running this enumeration script on this machine, the victim machine that we're in, and it's going to do a whole slew of different type of commands that we could normally do manually. But in this case here, to speed things up, we want to make sure it's done in an automated fashion. And it's going to go through and analyze absolutely everything. Now, one thing to note, which I got to remember if I did it or not, is that on your command prompt window, you may want to go to your file and preferences, and you may want to go over to behavior and make sure you check unlimited history, because I think by default it is not checked. And the reason I say that is because once it's done running, it may have outputted so much information that you will not be able to scroll up in the command prompt window and see it. For that, you would then have to do a more command instead and rerun it. But in this case, I'm just going to set it to unlimited history so I can actually view what's going on. So while it's running, let's look down through it here, see what we can find so far. All right, so you can see it's running a variety of different commands. It's looking for cron jobs, and we'll talk about that in another video. We're looking for things in red because those are the things that we kind of want to keep our eye on. And I'm just kind of skimming through to make sure. See, this is kind of interesting here. Is this a virtual machine? So it's running some sort of enumeration to be able to determine that. Let's see if there's any type of cool information that's coming up here. And again, like I said, the way they do this, it says red, you must look at it. Red and yellow. 99% is some sort of privilege escalation vector. Okay, that's what we're looking for. If it's light cyan, blue, or green, it's probably just typical stuff that you would normally see. So this is a really good one here. And so far, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, we got a pseudo version. Virtual machine. So Apache 2. This is just showing off the processes by doing a PS command of some sort. All right, let's keep scrolling down, keep scrolling down. Again, we're looking for red. Red. Active ports. All right, so it's taking quite a bit of time to run, so I'm going to go ahead and pause again real quick, and then we'll come back. All right, so after it ran for a little bit, it's still kind of going and stuff, but this caught my eye here. It said possible private SSH keys were found. So the way SSH works is they use this thing called public-private key cryptography, and it's called asymmetric. So back in the early days of cryptography, when we wanted to encrypt something, you would typically have, let's just say, a message, and you would have a single key, and you would encrypt that message with this key. The only way to decrypt this message is with this exact same key. So you would use the exact same key to decrypt it. The issue was, if I were to send that file to somebody else, I also have to send the key so that they can, decrypt it. So the problem was, in between me and the person I'm sending it to, can somebody intercept that? If somebody intercepts that, they have the key to decrypt it. We don't want that. So we needed a way to securely send the key so that a outside entity wouldn't be able to grab that and be able to do the decryption. So they came up with asymmetric, which essentially has a public and private key pair that is generated by a certificate. So you have a certificate authority out there that makes and generates a certificate, and it associates a public and a private key to a user. Okay, so if I log into my machine on Windows, let's just say, and I want to do, some encryption of my own files or whatever, then I will have to get a public and private key that is actually tied to my username. Okay, so in SSH, it uses this. Now, the concept between the public and private key, to make it a little bit better than symmetric, was that I would do anything that I do with one key, the other key will undo. So if I encrypt something with a public key that's in a pair, the only key that can decrypt it is the private key of that pair. Not any private key, has to be the exact same one in that pair. So in this particular case here, that's kind of how they'll get around that problem with symmetric, because now all I would need is a public key that's out there for everybody to see, and anybody can grab it, and anybody can, encrypt stuff with it. But they'll know that the private key is the one that decrypts it. For example, when you think about TLS or HTTPS, if I were to make a communication to Amazon and I want to give my credit card information to Amazon to do some sort of transaction, using HTTPS, it uses both symmetric and asymmetric, because what it does is it generates a symmetric single key and it encrypts the message. Then what it will do is it will take the public key of Amazon. So Amazon has their own certificate generated by whatever certificate authority they have. They have a public key that by name is public to everybody. In other words, my computer will connect to it and it has that little certificate lock symbol up at the top. It means it's basically grabbing the public key from Amazon in layman's terms. And what it will do is it will take that public key and it will encrypt the symmetric key that it used to encrypt my credit card information. Okay, so here's my credit card, plain text. My computer generates a symmetric single key. It encrypts that. Now, to get this encryption key to Amazon to decrypt and look at my credit card info, to do it securely over the internet, I take Amazon's public key and I encrypt that single key and I send that over. Now, the only key that can decrypt that decoder key is Amazon's private key. Amazon will not make that private key available to anyone. Okay, Amazon owns and has that private key over there at Amazon. So therefore, when it gets over to Amazon, if somebody were to intercept that message, they can't decrypt it because it's encrypted with a symmetric key, and the man in the middle cannot access that symmetric key because it's encrypted with the public key of Amazon. The only person in the world now that can decrypt this decoder key is Amazon's private key. Now, if Amazon's private key was happened to be made public, that means that anybody that has the private key can decode it. Okay, that's the issue. So that's why key storage is important. So in this particular case, SSH keys work pretty much the same way. You have a public key and you have a private key. Whatever the public key encrypts, the private key decrypts. Whatever the private key encrypts, the public key decrypts in the case of digital signatures. So in this case, the name of the private key in SSH by default is ID_RSA. If I have K, if I have K's private key, I don't need to know her password. I can just SSH in, point to that key, that private key, and it will log me in as that person. I don't need to put in a password. That is what we want. That's our huckleberry right there. So now that we know that K has that, let's go ahead and let's verify this is complete here. All right. So let's go ahead and CD back over to K. Okay. So I'm going to do an ls tac LA because the A means I can display hidden files. In this case, we do see she has SSH. So I'm going to CD over to that. And we'll do an ls tac LA. All right, so this is the authorized keys file for the SSH server, telling us which keys are authorized to actually connect to it. In this case, probably Jan and K. And here is our private key for K, and here is the public key. We don't need the public key. We want this bad boy here. So what we can do is we can copy the contents and make a new file on our machine. So let's go ahead and cat that particular key there. So we'll say cat IDRSA. Awesome. So by doing that, we get all of this here. So let me copy all of that and private key. Awesome. And then on my attack machine, not the victim machine, I can go ahead and use a text editor, command line text editor called Nano. And don't fight me on the Nano versus Vi war. I don't want to be dragged into that. So Nano, and we'll call it K's _RID_RSA. Okay, so I'll call it that. And then I would paste it in here. Oh, so I actually already did this. I did this earlier, so that's why it's showing up. Anyways, so I would then, it would give you a blank text file. But here you see I copied the entirety of that private key. We'll Control X out of it. So I have that file here. Yeah, I forgot. I had it listed already there. That's the one I'm going to use to SSH in. So now we'll say SSH tac I. Now this is the importance of using man pages, because during my pop series, I'm going to expect you to actually look for how to actually use these commands, because the script kiddie approach is to just trust what I say and just type whatever I want, right? But the real way we want to do things is we want to look for ourselves and see, why are we even using tac I? What does that do? So to that, you do a man, which is for manual page, and then the tool you're looking for, in this case, SSH. So if I were to look at the manual page, and I were to look at tac little case I, again, case sensitivity, little case I, it allows me to select a file from the private key for the actual, what we're going to be doing here. So that's exactly what we want. Now you do a Q to get out of that, and I'll go ahead and close that. All right, so we're going to use a tac I, and we're going to point to keys underscore ID underscore RSA, okay? And in this case here, what we'll do is we'll put K at, and then the IP address, which would be here. Okay, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to do. I think that should be good. Got that, got that. Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so let's hit enter. Aha. So it looks like this RSA key has some sort of password protection on it. Interesting. So let's see here. I suppose what we could do is we could use a tool called SSH to John to be able to do that. So let me Control C out of that. All right. So it looks like this particular key is encrypted. So what we can do is, let me bring up another window here. And I'm going to use the locate command, and there's something called SSH to John. I just don't know where it's located. Okay, there it is. And what this particular tool will allow me to do is it will go ahead and take an RSA key and put it into a format that John the Ripper can actually recognize or do something with. And John the Ripper is a password cracker that a lot of people like to use. So in this case, that's pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do the SSH to John. So we know it's at user share, so we're going to say /, oops. Looks like my window, there we go. Let's try that again. All right, so in this case, let me go back here. I had to fix my window on there. My camera had dipped. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say /usr share, and we'll say John SSH to John.py. And we'll do it against the keys underscore ID underscore RSA. And then I'll output it by doing the bracket to the right symbol, saying take whatever the output of this is and put it into a text file. And I'll say keys john.txt, something like that. Okay. All right, very cool. So now that we have that ready to rock and roll on that, we can now say /usr share John and SSH to John.py, and we'll do it against keys underscore John.txt. And then the word list that we'll use, we'll say tac word list equals, and then we'll do the rock you one because that's pretty awesome. So we'll say share word list rocku.txt. All right, cool. Let's see, am I misspelling it? Word list. All right, let me look at it again here. USR share word list. Make sure I'm spelling things correctly. So I'll just rock. Interesting. Is it just tac word list? Word list equals. All right, let me pause for a second and verify what's going on with that. All right, so I was actually trying to run the wrong command. I was trying to run, it looks like I was trying to run the SSH to John py again when I'm supposed to be just running John. So here's the command right there. So that. So John is the actual program. It already has a path variable to it, so I don't need to put the full absolute path. So John, Keys underscore John.txt, which is the one that they pulled from doing this particular command, SSH to John. And then the word list I used again was rocku.txt. So once I run that, you can see here down below that it did find the password of beeswax. So we have a password called beeswax, ready to rock and roll. So now we have Keys SSH. So let's go ahead and do a login of that. Let me go back over here. And let me exit out of the one that we're currently in. And then we'll go ahead and do SSH K at, and then we'll do the IP address there. And enter. And the password was beeswax. And I type it in wrong. Let's try it again. Beeswax. All right. So what we'll try to do then is we'll exit out of that. Control C. And we'll try again as Jan first. So we'll say Jan at, and let's see, actually, I'm sorry, we're using the wrong one. SSH attack I, Keys underscore, try to remember what it was now. Keys underscore IDRSA. So what I just did there by mistake was I was trying to just directly SSH in, and I needed to actually put the RSA key instead. So we'll say SSH attack I, pointing to the actual key, the private key that we had found, ID underscore RSA, and then we'll say K. Is it K or Case? I think it's K. K at IP address. All right, so now we have the passphrase for her key, which is beeswax. That should get us in. All right, awesome. So now we're in. We can do an ID and see that they're standard user, but they also have sudo privileges, which is interesting. So to view what they have for permissions for sudo, you can do a sudo attack L. And what was it? Beeswax. Oops, actually, you know what? That's not the password for her SSH. That's why. That's for the key. To unlock the key, that's right. So we don't actually know the password for her actual SSH, but we don't really need it because we can do our ls and we can see the pass.back cat it and pop, 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 another server drop. There we go. So that is the actual answer to the question on the challenge page. All the way down to the bottom. What is the final password you obtain? And there it is right there. Sweet. All right, so yeah, that was a pretty lengthy one. Had a couple hiccups, but that's all good. We'll keep it on video. I don't need to make it appear as if from some, you know, with some that nothing ever happens whenever I do any of these types of things here. So this is a good way to show how to kind of work through some of these issues. So essentially, we used enumeration first to find out the information that we needed, like the port number, and see if SSH was open, and then from there, we went ahead and did a Gobuster to be able to determine if there were any other paths that can give us any more information. There was, called /development. From there, we noticed a couple letters, possibly of usernames. And so we decided to use Hydra against that. And we were able to use it against Jan in that particular case. And we were able to get the password and log into the SSH for Jan. And then from there, we did a little bit more enumeration with the etc passwd, found K, found that there was a password file, this particular one in K's. And then we decided to go out and try to enumerate for K's password itself that we were doing there. And we were able to go ahead and copy the SSH ID, the private key, into our own text file and use that to be able to log in as K. We had also used a privilege escalation script for Linux called Linpeas.sh, and it ran through and it actually found all kinds of different things that we could look for to elevate our privileges to something that we could actually use, in this case being K's password. We found out when we tried to SSH in as K that it was password protected, so we used another tool called SSH to John, John being a password cracker, and it put the SSH, the IDRSA private key in a format that John could crack. And then we ran it against a word list called RockU. And very quickly, it found a simple password of beeswax, which probably alludes back to the text document we saw in development that says, hey, your password is weak, it sucks, change it, right? So from there, we went ahead and used the private key for K to be able to go ahead and SSH in without having to put a password in for the SSH, but we had to put a password in to unlock that particular private key, which in this case was beeswax. Once we were then logged in as K, we were able to go ahead and access pass.bak because we found out that that was actually under the ownership of K. So that is basic pen testing. I hope you guys learned quite a bit of good information off of that, but it shows all kinds of different methodology of how you would kind of approach one of these capture the flags. So in our next videos in the series, we're going to continue on doing these types of rooms. Some of them will be a little bit more difficult and more in-depth than this one. This one was just a kind of basic primer into what you would do for a basic pen test one to be able to break into a machine, grab a flag, and the methodology behind how you would do it and why you would use a command, why you would use a particular tool, why you would use a particular switch. Those things were then defined throughout this particular one here. So I hope to see you again at my next another server drop series over here with Chicago Good Night.